I hope you're looking out the window tonight. I can look straight out my window and I'm looking at the full moon and it is just beautiful. And while I was looking at it, I don't know why, but I recalled the old song. Some of you remember it. My sweetheart, the man in the moon. I'm going to marry him soon. Oh, that's an old... You know that song goes back to about 1892. But it's such a sweet melody, and I know somewhere in some musical movie that song has been sung. I always like those old songs, but I just thought I'd tell you, it's really a delight to be able to look out your window, not even get up off the couch, and I can just see it like it's looking down straight at me. Oh well, I've been pretty busy today. Made potato salad. Turned out good this time. I'm getting ready for a picnic lunch tomorrow with Jan and our friend Nina. You'll love Nina. Oh, she's pretty. She's a doll. But we've been on the US 68 yard sale before. I remember one of the yard sales, Nina bought an iron skillet. I don't know why she thought she needed an iron skillet, but anyway, I'm sure the price was right. We always have a good time on these yard sale trips. But of course, tomorrow's predicted to be 90 degrees. It was 90 degrees yesterday. I don't know how it's going to affect the vendors, but I hope they do well, and I don't know what'll happen with us. I hope it's not too hot. If there's a good breeze, we'll be okay. Otherwise, we may get halfway through the yard sale and decide, let's go home. Now, we've talked about the funny stories, just the everyday stories, the sad stories. Give me just a second here. You know this is going to happen. I have to do this every now and then, you know. Just a part of the natural being. Okay. Now, this isn't because I'm crying. I'm not crying yet. I promised to tell you this story, and I'm going to ask you this in the beginning. I'm going to ask you this now. What would you have done? This story goes back about 15 years. Now, this story is in one of my books, but I want to tell it to you in person. I want you to hear me tell it, not just read what I've said. And it may go a little different, you know, because I haven't read it lately. Don't remember what I said. About 15 years ago, I'm going to guess at the timing. I knew several of the residents living here at the towers, and some of us would go up on the rooftop during the day when it was pretty. In the mornings, you could go and there would be shade, and you didn't have to worry about getting too much sun. So when the weather got good, I would go up and stay about 30 minutes a day. Always took my book with me. Always had my pillow so I could lay on a chaise lounge. After I read no more than 4 pages, couldn't get past 4 pages in a book, till I was sleepy and I'd take a nap. Occasionally, a young man would be there when I would come up. We'd speak. We talked a little bit. We got to know each other pretty good. Not in the beginning. It was very casual talk. And then one day, my doorbell rang, and I opened the door, and there was Johnny. Now, Johnny was in a wheelchair. why was he ringing my doorbell? What did he want with me? And he said, I have caretakers who come. One comes in the morning and prepares me for the day, dresses me, gets me ready for the day. The other one comes at night and prepares me for bed. Johnny was a quadroplegic. He could move his right arm just enough to use it. Not a firm grip, just a light grip. He wore a bag on the back of his chair that was filled with water at all times, and it had a tube, and he could take his right hand and pull the tube up to his mouth where he could drink his water off and on during the day. Now, Johnny was a pleasant young man. We talked about the UK Wildcats. He was a big fan of the Kentucky Wildcats. And when I was learning day by day the different things about him, at what he could and couldn't do. So this day he says, this was just at the beginning of our acquaintance, I was wondering if you would come and get me ready for bed at night. My caretaker is not going to be able to come for a few weeks. She's got an emergency at home, and I don't have anybody that will help me go to bed at night. What do you say? I've never done anything like this before. I didn't know what to tell him. And another thing is, usually when someone asks me to do something for them, I have a problem saying no. If I can do it, I do it. But in this case, I was scared. I don't know what to, I don't think I can do this. He said, I'll tell you what to do, movement by movement. I'll show you what to do. I said, okay, I'll try it. Now, I'm a lady in her 70s. Why did he ask me? This young man was probably at least 6 feet tall. I'm going to have to lift him and move him from a wheelchair into his bed. How am I going to do that? Why did he ask someone my age? Why not some young resident that was strong and healthy? Well, there was no thinking, asking questions. I said, I'll try. So that night, I went down, he 4 floors below me. He was in his wheelchair, and he took me into the bedroom. He showed me every movement to make, how to get him out of that wheelchair, onto his bed, with all of his medication beside him. I had to undress him, completely undress him, and pull the cover up to his chest. By the time I got through working with him, I was exhausted. It took about 30 minutes to get him from that wheelchair ready for bed. Now, he had his remote control for his TV. He also had a control for his front door, that when someone came to the door, he could unlock it from his bed. Now, before I go any further, I want to ask you these questions. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you couldn't turn on a light switch? Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you couldn't brush your own teeth? You couldn't walk up and down stairs? How would you put your clothes on? How would you prepare your meals? He lived alone. Do you think you could handle all of this? This young man was 26 years old when he had an accident. I think he fell from a tree about 30 feet to the ground. From that day on, he was a quadroplegic. He was also an architect, and he could do some architectural work on computer. Now, what he did, let me show you. He put the pencil in his mouth. No, it's this way. The eraser was out. And he punched the keys on a computer with the pencil. That's how he controlled his work on his architectural work. Now, it wasn't a big job, but it was work, and he got paid for it. But the one thing that bothered me was he was on very limited income with the help of the government, just barely able to make ends meet. And if he got paid for what little work he did as an architect, that would be deducted from his government pay. I just couldn't believe my ears when he told me that. I thought, he is struggling just to have nutritious food and being able to buy his own food and his own clothes. And of course, he was paying rent. No, I didn't like that, but that's the government for you. Well, he would tell me different things that he could do. And he wanted me now and then he would call and ask if I would come down and prepare his lunch for him. Okay, I was willing to do that. He couldn't use the microwave. He wasn't able to use the microwave. Couldn't control it. If you gave him food in a plastic container that had a lid on it, and you put it in the refrigerator, how did you expect him to get that lid off that container? He couldn't do it. It sat in the refrigerator. So he showed me that he did have containers and plastic bags with a little Ziploc. And he said when it's put in the refrigerator, the flip top is left loose. The plastic bags, the Ziploc is opened and left where you can get your hand into it. Now, I don't know how he got it from the refrigerator to the sink to the microwave or whatever. But I would come down and I would put his meal on the plate. Let's say I took him his meal, because I got to where I was taking my cooking to him. Always when I had more than I needed for myself, I'd take him a plate. I would cut his meat for him because he could hold a fork. Now, the way he held a fork, you see how thin that is? Well, I don't know. I need a fork. But let's pretend this is a fork handle. Now, that's awfully loose because he could grip about like this, like this. He had a foam rubber piece of tubing, and it was about this big around. He would slide that down over his fork, and when he did that, it would fit right into the palm of his hand, and he could eat. That's how he ate. I would fill his glass with milk or whatever he wanted to drink, and he drank from a straw. He could lean forward and drink from the straw. Anything on his plate, take a slice of tomato. He couldn't cut that tomato. I would cut up everything on his plate so that he was able to pick it up with a fork or a spoon. I would fix soup for him, and he could eat it with the big tablespoon. He managed things like that. I always made sure that I prepared the things ready, hot, for him to just pull his chair up to the table and eat. And when he finished, I put the dish in the sink. He had someone who came during the day who would clean his apartment for him and who would wash the dishes. So these were the little things I started learning to do for Johnny. We had a good relationship. I'd kid with him. And the one thing I remember, I guess it was what you call a go-fund-it. The restaurants in town were going to one day a month, they would take 10% of every customer's pay, and that went into a fund to buy Johnny a van. He was learning how to drive a van. He showed me his gloves. He had gloves that with open fingers. The fingers were open. He put those gloves on. Somehow he had control. He could steer. He could steer the wheel. He could do things. That's how he handled his medicine at night that was lying on his bed. He had those gloves on, and he could grip the pills or whatever. I didn't see him do it, but I knew that's what he did. And he could control his actions with these special gloves. And I used to tease him. I'd see him, someone would come up in the van. He'd put his wheelchair in and he'd climb in. And I told him one day, I said, now when you get your van and I see you out front getting ready to go somewhere, I'm going the opposite direction. Well, he got a kick out of that. You know, I like to tease him because he needed a little laughter in his life too. He had friends. I saw his friends come and go. But it seemed like some of the friendships didn't last very long. I don't know, I can't even speak for something like that. How do you befriend someone so long and then you just get tired of doing it or helping him? I don't know. Have no idea. I just know what I did. His mother would bring him food. Others would bring him food. He had a neighbor across the hall. She got biscuit and gravy or something. from McDonald's every morning and her coffee. And she always got 2 biscuits. She always had an extra coffee. And she gave those to Johnny every morning for his breakfast. He was able to eat those and could drink the coffee. So there was no worry about him having breakfast each day until she died. And I don't know what he did after that. Okay, I would run into Johnny in the lobby. We'd talk just a few minutes, but most of our conversations were up on the roof. I'd go up there and he'd be sitting there looking out. You could look downtown Main Street. He wasn't one that would read, but he was very pleasant, always upbeat, positive attitude. He amazed me. Now, as time went by, he had extra help, and I noticed he had some young friends that would come in. Now, one of the things he did with his wheelchair, the battery with his wheelchair allowed him 5 miles. He could go 5 miles on that battery before it needed to be charged. Well, fortunately, the UK football stadium was just about a mile from where we lived, so he could go to the ball games in his wheelchair. Now you think about that. What if it's raining? He went anyway. He wrapped up in his rain garb, and he went to the football games. He didn't let anything like that stop him. And I'd see him occasionally, and I knew he was on his way to the stadium. He was going to the football game by himself. It reached a point where his friends, his new friends, I'd see them come and go. So I let up on going down to visit him. Now, the one thing he did ask me each year at Christmas, he would call and ask if I would wrap his Christmas presents for him. Now, I think he had a couple of nephews and family members. He didn't have money for big gifts. It might be something like a UK coffee mug, something like that. Well, anybody that likes the Wildcat be tickled to death to get a UK mug. So when he called and he'd say, would you wrap my gift for me? I said, okay, I'll be down. I would gather my scissors, my tape, my wrapping paper. I always had rolls of wrapping paper. I had ribbon. I gathered it all up because I knew he didn't have any of those things. So I carried it with me. I said, okay, here's all the stuff to wrap with. Where are your gifts? And he would say they're here on the table, and I would wrap his Christmas present for him every year. That was just a little thing. I prepared a lot of meals, not just for him. I was cooking for myself. But he had to eat too, and I had plenty. Why not share it? And I would walk in and I'd say, now, Johnny, I don't know if you're going to like this or not. It didn't turn out as well as I thought it would. He would always say, oh, it's good, it's good. And he would sometimes laugh and say, you say that every time and your food is good. Well, I think anything to him was good. If it was cooked good and prepared for him, he wouldn't complain. Wouldn't complain. Never heard him complain. I'm trying to think of a few things. As I said, I pulled away because he had his new friends. But I'd still go down and offer him some soup. I'd offer him meatloaf, cornbread. It didn't matter. He liked it, whatever it was. And sometimes I would stay and fix whatever needed to be fixed in a skillet on the stove. I would put everything on the table, the salt's right there, the ketchup right there. Whatever he needed was at his fingertips, the one hand fingertips. Okay, I hadn't talked to Johnny in a while. I always spoke to him, though, when we were in the lobby together, coming and going. We always had a few words to say, and that was it, but I didn't visit with him. Then one day, give me a minute, the doorman, the caretaker that came at night had been called. And Johnny said, "You don't need to come tonight." So the next morning, the lady that always came to get him dressed for the day, she rang his doorbell. No answer. He had his little remote control. She couldn't get in. She rang and she rang. No answer. She goes down, she tells the doorman, "I can't get in Johnny's apartment. He's not unlocking the door." The two of them went back together. The doorman got a master key, and he unlocked the door. They went in. Johnny was sitting in his living room in his wheelchair, still in the clothes that he had worn the day before. And there was a pool of blood circling his chair. He had stabbed himself in the side and bled to death. And that was his reason for telling the caretaker the night before, "You don't have to come tonight." He was quadroplegic. We don't give too much thought to something like that when we see someone going through the mall. We don't think about what they go through day by day. We don't know if they're happy or content or if they're wishing every day they could die. Now, my son, when he was in college, he just started his freshman year. He was staying at home with his dad. I'd moved away. I had sold my house and had moved. So he was living with his dad, and he got a job at the university. His job was getting up, leaving the house at 6 o'clock in the morning and going over to the dormitories and getting two young men ready for class every morning. They were quadroplegics. It was a learning experience for my son. And with what I went through with Johnny, I said I was so glad my son had that experience. It taught him a lot. His dad had bought him a car so that he would have transportation to and from school. And it was a Pontiac Firebird. Oh, it was a beauty, yes. And he kept it spotless. And one of the young men that he worked with every morning looked out the window and he saw my son's car. And he said, "That's the kind of car I had. That's the car I was driving when I had my accident." And all I could think was, I hope my son took in every word that young man said, because it could happen to him just as easily. Now, having heard this story, I can ask, what would you have done? Okay. I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. I want to leave you with good feeling, positive. Because there are other stories that, when you go through things like that, you just wonder why. So I'll always remember Johnny. Thank you.